From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and featured today a conversation with K-State's Kevin Herbel. He directs the Kansas Farm Management Association, and Kevin's here to offer a host of considerations on end-of-year farm financial assessment, the indicators of financial performance for each farm enterprise that you producers should examine, the value of knowing one's costs of production in precise terms, how one's income numbers for the year figure into tax management decisions, and how it all factors into management planning for 2021. On this week's horticulture segment later on, K-State's Ward Upham outlines the steps for dormant seeding cool season grass here in the winter. All that and more next on Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Glad to have you aboard for another Agriculture Today. Well, we're pushing ever steadily toward the end of this calendar year, 2020. And for you farm and ranch managers, it is a time you need to, if you haven't started already, collect your thoughts on where your enterprises are economically and start planning as well for 2021. And we've brought by now the Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Management Association for a conversation on things to think about in this respect. Kevin Herbel is with us once more. Kevin, you and your team of economists with the Kansas Farm Management Association, highly active this time of year and engaged in dialogue with producers about the things we're going to address today, aren't you?
Certainly, a lot of things that take place as we consider the end of the year, consider tax planning type activities, consider pulling records together for the year, looking at ways we can help producers utilize records to make improved decisions on the farm.
When you look back at this year 2020 and all of its trappings, what comes to your mind as things that producers should concentrate on?
Well, certainly it's been a difficult year for most of us in many different ways. Many things certainly happening that are out of our control. We like to have things in a fashion where we can control them rather than to have things out of control. And certainly important in the midst of that to step back, assess where we're at, consider as we end 2020, as we move into 21, what are the things that we can exert some control over, and how do we know what those things are? During 2020, we've seen markets change dramatically for many different reasons. We've had the trade concerns, export levels, the impact of COVID. We had MFP payments early in the year. We've had CFAP, PPP loans, just many different things taking place with these increased level of dollar flow related to government payments. Some farms have increased levels of grain held in storage at this point in time since their cash flow needs were met in some other ways. At the same time, we've got some producers who began to price when we started to see price movements up, and then they turned around and looked and saw that it moved up a whole lot more, and much discouragement on that part on some. I guess don't know that it helps at all to know that there's others in your position as well, but that is something we could say, as I've talked to a lot of producers that are in that position. But we've had drought conditions in certain parts of the state, looking at low yields, maybe at best average yields in those areas, to record yields in some other areas. So all of that put together creates just a wide range of positions that farms might be in. And certainly if you look at anything, and we will be later in spring posting averages from 2020 and different things of that nature. And as it always is the case, there's just a wide range of place individual farms are at, and important for each farm to know and understand their position and where they're at. And it is going into these winter months where much planning takes place on the farms and ranches of Kansas.
As this planning does occur on each individual farm operation. What are the things that producers need to do to actually analyze where they're at in a representative way that will be helpful to them?
Now, and as we consider that, when we're looking at building anything, whether you're building a building of some kind, whether you're building a set of information for the purpose of decision making, anything you're going to build needs to have a solid foundation. Mm-hmm. And the solid foundation for good management decision making is a good set of records. And so it's very important for each farm to have a good set of records. And the types of records, the way in which records are used around the state does vary greatly. It's important, I think, for each decision maker on the farm to focus on the facts, not just the facts in general around and about them, but to focus on your facts, to know your numbers. This is something I've said frequently, I think, when we've done interviews. Eric said, know your numbers and use your numbers. Averages are just that. It's an average of a group of producers. Your decisions need to be made by utilizing your records to better understand your situation and use that information to set goals for the steps that you desire to take for your farm and your family.
So as one studies the numbers from their operations, knowing where they stand financially, what are some of the bits and pieces of operational information that helps a producer get a grip on that?
Now, certainly within that, as we look at a farm, knowing their overall financial position, it's going to include looking at some of the common financial statements that we will reference, things like a balance sheet and income statement. With that balance sheet, knowing their position of their assets and liabilities, their position of their equity, and how has that changed during the last year with all these various different things that have happened during 2020? What has been the impact of those activities on the financial position that your farm operation, that your family is in? And within that, also considering the current financial position. We talk often about working capital, that being the difference between current assets and current liabilities. How has that changed in the past year? What is their ability to make decisions and take actions on the farm without having to approach a lender or some other source of an ability to have the funds to make those decisions and take actions? And I think something I would definitely encourage people to think about as they come into the end of 2020, as tax planning takes place, as they consider pulling together their tax planning with their financial position and making those decisions. If they've had a good year, if they've had a year where they do have improved income, whether it's because of government payments, because of above average yields, whatever it happens to be, because of these improved prices we've had recently, don't right away turn to the idea of paying little to no tax on the year and taking steps to not improve their financial position when they were in a position to do so. I think it's very important for them to at least make the decision that they're going to take some of those steps and gain an understanding first of where they could be with a solidified financial position based on that good year, and know and understand where that could be, and be very careful about making decisions, taking steps to just let the tax end of things direct where they're going to end up financially.
They should make decisions on the basis of what's good for the operation in the long run financially, as opposed to the short-term tax implications and consequences then.
That would certainly be my encouragement to them. And certainly each producer needs to make decisions based on where they want to be. But that would be the encouragement I would look to give them, is to let a opportunity to improve and solidify your financial position actually result in that being the place that you find yourself in as you begin 2021.
Kevin, you're a proponent of an income statement as a mechanism for determining where one really is realistically with their operation. You might expand on that.
Well, and certainly as we consider the income statement, many farms are keeping their records on a cash basis. They're going to be cash basis for tax purposes and working through things from that nature. And what we would encourage people to do is to look at an accrual-based income statement, make adjustments to those cash revenues, cash expenses for the inventory changes in accounts payable, and those amounts that are in inventory, and arrive at an accrual income measure as to where they're at on the farm. As we consider things that way, it's We're better able to assess the profitability of the operation and where they're at as they've made decisions of this last year.
And when we think about income statements, how deep into the weeds does one need to get here?
Well, I think within that, for each producer, for each decision maker on the farm, they do need to identify where they're at and using records to make decisions, and look at each year, if they can, to take a step forward, improving the way they use their records to help them manage their decisions. For some farms where they've done very little at utilizing records, just getting to the point of a whole farm income statement that makes some of these accrual adjustments to better understand their position at the whole farm level is going to be a big move in a positive direction for them. For others, moving to the point of really knowing and understanding their cost of production through use of enterprise records. And what a lot of people think about right away from a cost management standpoint is always considering lower cost. And I think the place we need to be is to be considering efficient cost management. For most of us, that's going to be lower cost than where we're currently at. But efficient cost management would involve knowing and understanding your resources and seeking to manage those resources well. In some instances, that's going to be or might be increased inputs because of the productive opportunity that's there relative to what's being produced on in that instance. And other places, it might be reduced cost of production. So knowing and understanding resources and seeking that level of efficient cost management is very important. But each farm should assess where they're at and look to take a step to move in a positive direction.
And you hit upon the side of the equation we want to give due attention to in our second part of our conversation here after we take this break, Kevin. That is cost management and what that means to the operation's financial status. Kevin Herbel is with us from the Kansas Farm Management Association at Kansas State University. We are discussing end-of-year considerations on one's farm and ranch financial position and planning for 2021. And we'll return with Kevin after this. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
With the shortage of primary care positions, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State Research and Extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Picking back up now in Agriculture Today on our visit with the Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Management Association, Kevin Herbel. Kevin's passing along some insight for you producers to give due consideration as you think about planning your financial path for 2021. Year by year, when we visit about the net income reports for the Kansas Farm Management Association farms, the cost management side is just ultra imperative here. Efficiency in cost management will vary inevitably from operation to operation, so there's no cookie cutter here whatsoever.
Certainly not a cookie cutter, and a need for each farm, again, to know their numbers and use their numbers as they're making decisions. And in a year where we have many varied additional things taking place, we've had some of these different levels of government program dollars flowing into the farm, and factors such as impact of the weather on yields and all these kind of things that are all the revenue side of the equation. And as we consider those, certainly there's some things there that can be controlled, and certainly seeking to be as efficient and effective in what we produce and the level of that production. And from a cost of production standpoint, we're making those decisions in most instances based on the individual enterprises that we're producing on the farm. Some of those, and certainly more recently, the availability of information at increasingly smaller levels on the farm is there, and so we're making decisions on acres and certain parts of fields and those type of things. But all of that comes together in knowing and understanding that cost of production in a way that allows making improved decisions.
We can't have this discussion without at least alluding to the term benchmarking here. That allows one to compare where they're at with peers, with other operations, And you would certainly endorse that as part of this process, wouldn't you, Kevin?
Certainly would, Eric. And the idea of benchmarking and comparing, and I would maybe reference benchmarking as two different ways that a person can benchmark. One of those, looking at against yourself over time. So the whole farm level, one thing I mentioned earlier was this idea of comparing your equity position beginning of year to the end of the year, comparing your working capital beginning of year to end of year, comparing your cost of production for wheat or grain sorghum or corn or soybeans this year compared to last year or the previous 5 years, and how has that changed? And why has it changed? I think more than just identifying the what and how things are different is to look into things at a level to understand the why. But as we look at benchmarking, against yourself, you can answer some of those things. And then the next thing is against others. And certainly our KFMA data that is available to allow farms to benchmark and assess how does their cost of production compare to others. Within there, you can explore areas where you might need to consider making changes, as well as identify maybe it's an enterprise, maybe it's a certain cost center within that enterprise where there is a competitive advantage on a farm where they can build on that as they make decisions as they move forward into the future.
As we approach the end of the year, we are thinking in terms, as we talk, about planning for 2021. So all of what we've talked about today goes into that plan. How does one actually, though, craft that in an efficient way, in an effective way that's useful to the producer as they make the transition to the new year?
Well, and certainly as we think back, and I think back when I did work in the field with the farm management program, when I worked as a farm analyst for a time, sitting down with producers, and so we put the records together, we show them the numbers, and they say, well, that's all good and fine. I now know that. Well, just knowing something isn't useful if you do not look to take action on it. So, as we've said earlier, certainly the idea of focusing on their facts, and as they learn those facts and what their situation really is, it's important to go beyond that and make a plan to take action and prioritize those actions, to seek to act on, to exert control on the things that they can influence. We often say, well, this wasn't a very good year. Well, it was because of the weather, or look what the prices did, or whatever. We want to easily seek to focus on or point blame to things that aren't necessarily under our control. But even with those things, there are things from a management perspective that we can control. We make decisions relative to crop insurance to help deal with some of the weather activity. We can make decisions relative to how we price and how we approach managing the risk of prices to manage those. And then we can also look at those cost of production items and how we make decisions there. What is the most cost-efficient place to be relative to the resources that I farm, that I manage on this farm? And out of that, identify what information is needed to take steps in addressing areas that are found where there are concerns. And identifying that need for information is going to need another step, and that's going to be identifying who can potentially provide that information and developing a network of advisors to help with that. And that can certainly be KFMA economists that a farm is working with in some instances, the county extension agents, the various individuals that they have as advisors to their farm, and looking to put together a plan as to how that information can be accessed. And then I think it's very important, and this is for most of us at least. Some of us may get our things accomplished without setting a timeline for ourselves, but most of us need a timeline, need some deadlines in place for completing actions so that we do move forward and get those actions taken. And all through any of these, things change. And I think some of the farms that I've worked with in the past, ones that are the most successful as we go through changes, are ones that are able to make adjustments, to adapt things, to change their plan as things move forward and the information becomes different as circumstances change, to adjust and make the needed changes to address what is now a different set of factors to be considered.
Want to get into one more thing as we round this out, and that is the overwhelming flood of data, and you alluded to this earlier, that producers have at their disposal now. and how that can be most efficiently utilized in this planning process. Thoughts on that?
Well, certainly the amount of data available can be overwhelming. Even to someone, I've spent most of my working life working with data and numbers, and some of the amounts of data that can be available is overwhelming. And, that data is coming at field levels, at smaller levels, and it's only going to continue to be more available to us and more detailed in what is available. I think it's important for each producer to begin to use that data carefully and identify where they can achieve value from it. I think the fact that we can collect this data, you want to get that data collected. If you have the resources, the systems in place to allow collecting the data, get the data collected. The opportunities here in using that data will only be increasing in the future, and to get as many years of data. I know in working with farms utilizing enterprise records and an enterprise analysis, well, having 1 year is one thing. Having 5 years is a lot better, because now we can begin to assess more accurately information about their decisions and management of resources. It's going to be the same with this more detailed level, that we need to have multiple years of it to begin to assess where things are at, and find some resources, find a advisor, find someone to help them take a step forward in better understanding the data and utilizing it to make better decisions. Let the technology help and not hinder your process of decision making, and look to take steps forward. You have yield data, yield maps, and you enjoy looking at them and seeing the better producing, the lower producing, and that can guide decision making and just understanding how the costs and revenues fit together with those yield maps relative to making decisions. The reason I would say to walk carefully, though, within that is to don't get to a point where you say, well, this is just overwhelming and too much beyond what I can use, and you turn away from it and lose an opportunity that might be there at a improved or more valuable level in the future. So have yourself prepared. As I've worked with farms over the time, I've talked about preparedness and opportunity. The preparedness is something we can do something about. The opportunities, sometimes we can affect. More often they come to us. Well, we often can't respond to a good opportunity if we're not prepared. Right. So do the efforts you can to keep the records, to have things in an order where you're utilizing records at an increasing level, at an improved level each year, and look to move forward in a way where when opportunities come, you're prepared and ready to respond.
Well, this, as it is every year, is a pivotal time for farm and ranch management, finishing up the calendar year, moving into the next. As Kevin suggests, if you're looking for assistance in this process, look into what the Kansas Farm Management Association has to offer along that line. You can learn more about the association at agmanager.info. Kevin, we always appreciate the insight on things that producers need to be thinking about in terms of their farm and ranch management. Thanks for coming over.
Thank you, Eric.
He's the executive director of the Kansas Farm Management Association out of the Agricultural Economics Department here at Kansas State University, Kevin Herbel. We'll be back after this break. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson here, and continuing with today's agricultural news headlines for you now, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, from Capitol Hill yesterday, the House Steering Committee cast votes on who they support to lead the various standing committees in the 117th Congress, with Representative David Scott of Georgia emerging as their choice to chair the House Agriculture Committee. He received 32 votes to 19 for Representative Jim Costa of California. While Costa has touted the backing of several agricultural groups for him to take that Ag panel gavel, Scott importantly received the support of current House Ag Committee Chairman Colin Peterson, who was defeated in his bid for re-election. Scott is also the second-ranking Democrat on the panel in terms of seniority. That's something which Peterson noted when he endorsed Scott for the chairman's spot. The full House Democratic caucus will make its choices today on who will lead the committees. The House Republican Steering Committee also has recommended the House GOP caucus elect Representative Glenn Thompson of Pennsylvania as the ranking member for the House Agriculture Committee. 2020 farm sector income may be much higher than had been projected a few months ago, according to the USDA's chief economist. The USDA's Gary Crawford has more.
When farmers close the books on 2020, their income situations as a whole might end up better than what had been forecast up to now. Back in September, USDA was projecting 2020 net cash farm income would be just over $115 billion. This week's new forecast,
$134.1 billion.
USDA's chief economist Rob Johansson says there are a couple of reasons for that big $19 billion upturn from September in projected income.
Higher cash receipts than we expected, up from September by $8.2 billion, and government payments are up $9.3 billion.
Yes, he says back in September, USDA had not figured in the second round of the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, CFAP-2, and Johansson says that's a big number.
The CFAP-2 is now estimated to add $13.3 billion to 2020 income,
taking this year's net cash farm income almost 23% higher than 2019. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Syngenta has filed a motion to intervene in a federal lawsuit that challenges the EPA's approval of its herbicide atrazine. That lawsuit was filed in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit in San Francisco last month by the Rural Coalition Pesticide Action Network, Beyond Pesticides, the Center for Biological Diversity, and the Center for Food Safety. Syngenta, the registrant and primary manufacturer of atrazine, wants a chance to defend its herbicide in that lawsuit, which only named the EPA as a defendant. Atrazine is under re-registration review by the EPA, and in September, the agency released an interim registration decision approving its continued use. The environmental groups have lobbied for atrazine to be banned entirely based on their concerns about human health risks and environmental problems, especially concerning water quality, in their view. The agency is finalizing label requirements to include mandatory spray drift control measures to minimize pesticide drift into non-target areas, including bodies of water, as well as updating label directions to slow weed resistance to atrazine. New label language will prohibit spraying during a temperature inversion, will set a 15-mile-per-hour wind speed restriction for aerial and ground applications, as well as add specific boom and nozzle requirements. And the Kansas Soybean Association Board of Directors has named Caleb Little as the incoming chief executive officer of that organization. Caleb is a native of Rossville in Shawnee County. He comes to Kansas Soybean from the National Biodiesel Board, where he was the communications director. That board was his first career stop following graduation from Kansas State University back in 2009 when he received his degree in agricultural communication and journalism. Under the direction of the Kansas Soybean Board of Directors, the CEO manages and implements the production and utilization research, the domestic and international market development and education projects for the Commission, and federal and state lobbying programs for the association. He will succeed Kenlyn Johannes, who is retiring after an accomplished 40-year career in the soybean industry, including 20 years at Kansas Soybean. Caleb's first day in office is January the 4th. And that takes us right into this week's Kansas Soybean Update with Greg Akagi. Greg?
We're joined now by Jim Carroll, who is an Arkansas soybean producer and serves as the chairman of the United Soybean Board. And Jim, an exciting time to be part of the soybean industry as you're starting to see more uses for soybeans in industrial areas.
Yes, sir, we really are. We've moved into some concrete sealants and trying to work with asphalt people, and both of these look very good. But we're also looking at consumer goods, which is working with Goodyear for tires, and we've got some products going into shoes. And I just think, to me, it's the first time that we've really broken away from animal feeds and biodiesel and getting into things that the ordinary person needs and uses every day, the public. I'm pleased about it.
The concrete sealants, I know, are taking place in Indiana, and boy, it's had some really good results early on, too.
Yes, and you know, this country's infrastructure is getting weaker, so anything we can do, and I'm talking about as a country, to get it back, and this is just one thing that maybe the soybean farmer can contribute.
And probably producers don't realize that U.S. soybeans can really be of a benefit, not only for the concrete sealants, especially as you get into the winter months. In asphalt products, probably people wouldn't even think about how can we use U.S. soybeans in asphalt products.
Sure, and what we're doing is trying to replace the petroleum with an environmentally friendly oil and something that's renewable and sustainable. And I think it's a good fit, and I really think if it just give us another year or two, you're going to see a lot of it produced.
And that's already been proven in some of the areas with the tires that have already been implemented, but in this case, the expansion of being able to use the soybean products in shoes.
Yes, won't that be a great combination to have an asphalt and a tire that's both environmentally and renewable, to working in cohesion with each other as we go?
But it also shows the use of the checkoff dollars and the importance in getting that best bang out of the buck, so to speak.
Yes, sir, and we're looking at broadening that view all the time and doing as good as we can with our checkoff money every year.
All right. Jim, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. You guys are the ones that get us out in front of everybody, and I appreciate that, and I know the board does.
That is Jim Carroll, who is an Arkansas producer and serves as chairman of the United Soybean Board. He joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Thanks, Greg. And you're listening to Agriculture Today.
Social distancing slows the spread of coronavirus, so stay a minimum of 6 feet away from others and stay home if you can. More info at coronavirus.gov. Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Coming your way next on Agriculture Today, our weekly horticulture segment. And yes, there is some lawn care activity you can enact at this time of the year, as cold as it might seem outside. That would be dormant seeding of turf grass. Now, just how far can you go with that is what we'll explore right here with K-State horticulturist Ward Upham. Mike's side with us once again. And when we discuss this project, Ward, we're specifically talking about a certain type of turf grass.
That's right. We're talking about the cool season grasses, which is going to be tall fescue and Kentucky bluegrass, not the warm season grasses, which would be Bermuda, zoysia, and buffalo. Those are going to have different requirements.
Now, you have pressed this point on and on over the years. The preferred time to seed cool season grasses is earlier on in the fall, right?
That's right. Usually you're looking at maybe late August, but September is the month where you really want to get it in, because then it'll come up and be mature enough by the next summer that it should be able to survive without any problems. It's not the winter that's a problem for this stuff. It's the summer, because it's a cool season grass. And so you want as mature as possible by the time you hit that hot summer weather.
So then what is one attempting to accomplish by seeding here in almost early winter?
That's right. So let's say you had some bare spots you didn't get taken care of in the fall. You know, you wanted to overseed, but you just didn't get it done. So that's normally where you use dormant seeding. You don't use it to do a whole lawn. It's just to fill in some bare spots. And the idea is that if you can dormant seed at this time of year, it's going to come up as early as possible in the spring and be as mature as possible by the time hot weather hits. You could say, well, why don't you just do spring seeding? Mm-hmm. Spring seeding can be every bit as good, but if we have a wet spring, it may be delayed. And if it's delayed too long, you've got too young a grass to go into that hot summer weather. And there are also options we have for dormant seeding that make it actually easier than spring seeding.
Let's talk about those. And we're getting into the methods of going about this here.
That's right. Now, regardless of method used, we have to remember certain things. One is we need to have good seed-soil contact. The other thing you're going to notice if you do dormant seeding is there's going to be some birds that get some of that seed. Don't worry about it. We've looked at that. They don't get enough to really make any difference. As long as you have good seed-soil contact, you're set to go. And so one of those methods, one of the easy methods, is if you have a light snowfall of up to about an inch. If you have that, you can sprinkle the seed over the snow in those bare spots, and as that snow melts, it'll carry the seed into good contact with the soil. So all I have to do is broadcast that seed in the bare spots. When it melts, you're ready to go. You don't have to do anything extra. The other method is a lot like it, but that soil has to be really wet. And if it's wet enough and it freezes overnight, that soil, if it's bare soil, is going to form natural pockets. And so when you overseed, it'll fall into those pockets, and when it thaws during the day, those pockets will collapse. Again, you have a perfect seed bed, and it didn't take very much work. Now, the third method is the normal method. Same thing you'd use in the spring. You broadcast the seed, and then you scratch it in with a rake. And so, again, you need that good seed-soil contact, regardless what method you use. But those are the three methods you can use to dormant seed. And you can do dormant seeding any time from December through February.
Do we talk in terms of seeding rates for this kind of project, or just go by your best guess?
Yeah, so really what you're looking at on the tall fescue is going to be 6 to 8 pounds per 1,000 square feet, and on Kentucky bluegrass it's 2 to 3. That can be a little bit hard when you're doing spots, but you can usually get a good idea of how thick it needs to be. You're not covering the ground. Okay, you're going to have some distance between those seed. And even when you rake it in, there's going to be some on top. There's no way you can avoid that. You want it shallow but in good contact.
Of course, the results won't make themselves apparent until spring warm-up, but you should know fairly quickly upon those warmer temperatures, should you not?
You should, and that gets that seed up absolutely as early as possible in the spring, so it has a better chance of surviving the summer. You know, if we have a good summer, it's going to survive until fall and be fine. If we have a very extreme summer, it's going to be difficult to carry it through, but still probably worth the effort of trying to make it work.
You have one word of caution here for folks who would want to spot seed their lawn in this fashion during the dormant period. That is how they manage that tender new grass when it does emerge in the spring. And focusing here on weed control, you say.
That's right. What we're looking at usually in the spring are going to be crabgrass preventers. We also need to look at broadleaf herbicides. With broadleaf herbicides, that grass needs to be mowed a couple of times before it's mature enough they use a broadleaf, you know, like going after dandelions, that type of thing. But if you're talking about a pre-emergent, which is used to prevent crabgrass and other things from coming up, then you do have an option. What you're looking for is a product that contains dimension. The chemical name is dithiopyr. Most of our homeowner products, that is the active ingredient. And so what you look for on that label, don't worry about whether it says dimension or dithiopyr. On that label, see if it lists tall fescue and Kentucky bluegrass as able to withstand the application 2 weeks after the grass comes up. If it does, you're good to go. You just have to wait for it to come up. And usually if you have your crabgrass preventer down by mid-April, you're good. And in some places, you can go clear till May 1st. And that grass is going to be up at least 2 weeks by then. But do read the label. If it says it can be applied within 2 weeks after emergence, you're good to go. Most of those other pre-emergence herbicides, you can't do that with. Again, you have to wait until that grass has been mowed 2 or 3 times. And so that's the exception to the rule. And it's a good option because you have a thin turf that probably will have crabgrass if you don't do something to prevent it.
And that is the point here, that one needs to give that new grass a competitive advantage. You don't want to abstain from weed control by any stretch, but be selective about product.
That's right. You have to be a little bit picky on that.
One final thing here as far as managing that seed until green up. We're expecting a dry winter. Mm-hmm. Should one throw a little water out there if we have 3-4 weeks absent of rain or snow?
You don't have to worry about that until you get probably into early March, because that seed is not going to germinate during the winter. And so it doesn't need any water until then. But at that point, you want to make sure that that seed stays moist so that can germinate and start to grow.
Well, if you have that bare spot in your cool season lawn and you want to remedy that, a dormant seeding will work. But do follow the steps that Ward outlined for us today, and you will succeed in this project. Ward, thanks as always.
You bet.
Ward Upham, horticulturist, K-State Research and Extension, and that is our horticulture segment for this week. Closing out this Thursday edition. Thanks, as always, for listening in, and please rejoin us right here tomorrow. Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.